Picture this. It's May 6th, 1937. The absolute largest flying machine ever built is gliding completely silently over New Jersey. It's longer than 2 football fields. Down inside, passengers are literally dining on fine china and sleeping in private cabins, suspended 4,000 feet above the dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It is the absolute pinnacle of luxury and human engineering. But in just a matter of moments, this triumph of aviation is going to completely vanish. Welcome to this explainer, where today we're diving deep into a tense, narrative-driven look at one of the most infamous technological disasters in human history.
So let's start with this number, 34 seconds. That's it. That is exactly how long it took for this absolute marvel of modern engineering to turn into a terrifying falling wall of fire. Just 34 seconds to permanently end an entire era of human travel. And what makes those 34 seconds so utterly agonizing, so hard to wrap our heads around, is the human toll. There were 97 passengers and crew members on board the Hindenburg as it made its final approach. 97 people trapped thousands of feet in the air. You see, this isn't just a story about a machine failing. It's a story about a massive human crisis, and a mystery that, almost 90 years later, we actually still haven't fully solved.
Which brings us to part 1, the Golden Age of Airships.
To really understand this tragedy, we have to put ourselves in the 1930s. Yes, airplanes existed, but they were pretty small, they were incredibly loud, and they definitely couldn't cross oceans. But airships could. And the Hindenburg was a true behemoth. We're talking 804 feet long, 135 feet in diameter, all pushed through the sky by 4 massive diesel engines. Passengers absolutely loved the luxurious lounge, the dining room, and get this, even a pressurized smoking room. But this extreme luxury masked a really terrifying reality. To keep this massive structure up in the air, it required 7 million cubic feet of highly flammable hydrogen gas.
Let's move to part 2. The Helium Embargo.
Now, here is a crucial piece of the puzzle. Germany actually knew exactly how dangerous hydrogen was, and they never wanted to use this highly combustible gas as their first choice. They desperately wanted to use helium. Helium is inert. It literally cannot burn. It would have been perfectly safe. So why didn't they use it? Well, there was a massive geopolitical hurdle. The United States basically controlled the entire global supply of helium. Back in 1927, Congress passed the Helium Control Act, strictly banning its export. This was partly for safety, but also to keep a vital, strategic resource out of the hands of a rapidly rearming Nazi Germany. So, forced into a corner by this embargo, German engineers compromised. They filled their crown jewel with cheap, readily available, but highly flammable hydrogen instead.
But, to be completely fair here, we have to look at their track record, which honestly makes the impending disaster feel like this tragic illusion of safety. For 20 years, German engineers had operated hydrogen airships without a single passenger dying from a fire. 2 whole decades of flawless flight records. So they weren't just being reckless, they genuinely, truly believed that through their strict procedures, their meticulous design, and their rigid discipline, they had completely solved the hydrogen danger. But as we know, they were terribly wrong.
This sets the stage for part 3, the final approach. On that fateful evening, that illusion of safety was completely shattered. The Hindenburg was just hours away from landing at Naval Air Station Lakehurst, New Jersey, but heavy thunderstorms had delayed the arrival. The air that night was incredibly thick with static electricity, just a really heavy, charged atmosphere. At 7 p.m., the final descent finally begins. And everything feels totally routine. Passengers are literally waving to reporters down below. At 7:21 p.m., the landing lines drop to the ground crew. But then, at exactly 7:25 p.m., witnesses on the ground spot it. A fatal spark. Just a flicker of blue-white light right near the top fin. And 4 seconds later, the tail just bursts into flame.
Now we enter part 4, 34 seconds of fire.
What happens next unfolds almost too fast to even comprehend. The fire just races forward through those enormous gas cells with this terrifying, unimaginable speed.
Instantly, the structural integrity of the rear of the ship is totally destroyed, and the enormous tail of the airship completely collapses, crashing incredibly hard into the ground below.
And because the rear has suddenly dropped, the nose of the ship is thrust violently skyward. Flames are now just pouring out of the metallic frame like a gigantic blowtorch. Inside the gondola, the scene is absolutely horrific. With the ship falling and burning all at once, desperate passengers realize they simply cannot wait for the fire to reach them. People actually begin breaking windows and jumping 20 to 30 feet through the air, plummeting toward the earth, as the ground crew frantically runs directly toward the flaming wreckage to try and pull people out.
By the time the massive skeletal frame fully hits the earth, it's just blackened metal. The grim toll of those exact 34 seconds was 36 lives lost. But there's something incredibly important to understand about this tragedy, and it's the exact cause of those fatalities. Because hydrogen burns so incredibly fast, and because it burns upward, the fire actually exhausted itself, moving up and away from the passenger gondola in those critical first few seconds. The vast majority of those 36 tragic deaths were actually not caused by the hydrogen fire itself. They were caused by the sheer impact of jumping from extreme heights, or by the burning of the ship's heavy diesel fuel.
Which brings us to a metric from that night that honestly still blows my mind. 62. 62 people walked, ran, or were dragged away alive from an exploding 7 million cubic foot hydrogen airship. It is an absolute miracle of survival amidst what is easily one of the most violent vehicular destructions ever caught on film.
Let's look at Part 5, 3 Unresolved Theories.
So the ship is destroyed, and obviously the world demands to know why. And this is where the story shifts into an ongoing historical investigation. Today there are 3 prevailing theories, but still absolutely no conclusive proof. The first, and definitely the most widely accepted scientific explanation, is static discharge. Remember that incredibly bad stormy weather we talked about? Well, that storm-charged atmosphere likely built up massive amounts of static electricity right on the outer skin of the ship. When those landing lines touched the wet earth, grounding the massive frame, a fateful spark of static likely jumped right across the skin and ignited a localized pocket of leaking hydrogen.
But investigators have 2 other very plausible theories. Theory number 2 is structural failure. You see, the Hindenburg made some really sharp, sudden turns just before landing. Some engineers believe that the immense stress of those turns actually snapped a tension wire inside the massive frame. That wire whipped back, punctured a gas cell, and flooded a localized area with hydrogen, just waiting for a spark. And then there is the third theory, one born entirely out of the extreme political tension of 1937: sabotage. Behind closed doors, there were suspicions that an anti-Nazi saboteur had planted an incendiary device on board. Now, just to be perfectly clear and totally neutral here, absolutely no credible evidence has ever supported this. But the geopolitical climate was just so unbelievably tense at the time that formal sabotage investigations were launched anyway.
Finally, Part 6, the end of an era.
Ultimately, we may never know for sure if it was static, a snapped wire, or sabotage. But what historians and engineers absolutely agree on is this. The devastating combustibility of hydrogen turned a tiny, unexplained anomaly into a massive inferno, dooming an entire industry quite literally overnight. And a huge part of why the cultural impact was so profound was because of how well documented it was. This wasn't just some story people read in a newspaper days later. It was captured right there on newsreel film. It was broadcast live on the radio by a reporter who watched the flames erupt in real time, his voice completely breaking as he famously cried out, "Oh, the humanity." These horrific visuals, this agonizing audio, it played in movie theaters across the entire globe. In a matter of weeks, public confidence was completely and irreversibly shattered.
And so, the Hindenburg earned a very solemn title in history. It was the last great passenger airship ever flown commercially. The age of giant hydrogen airships was this incredible golden era, but it lasted less than 4 decades. Within just 2 short years of the crash, passenger airships vanished from the skies entirely. They were permanently replaced by the very airplanes that had previously seemed way too small and loud to even compete.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. How does a single, completely unexplained spark permanently change the trajectory of human innovation forever? Think about it. An entire branch of technology, this incredibly luxurious way to see the world, was simply wiped from the skies in exactly 34 seconds, all because of one tiny fatal flaw that we still can't completely explain today. If you enjoyed this explainer and want to understand more about how these incredible historical mysteries unfold, make sure to seek out more deep dives into history's most infamous disasters. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey today, and as always, keep asking questions.